Imagine returning home after years of epic battles, only to find that your job just got extended by a decade without even asking for it. That's exactly what happened when Julius Caesar swaggered back into Rome in 46 before the Common Era, armed with victories, 4 questionable triumphs, and enough silver to make a billionaire blush. And trust me, things were about to get even weirder. The moment of triumph. Caesar's return to Rome in 46 before the Common Era. In the summer of 46 before the Common Era, Julius Caesar made his triumphant return to Rome, emerging from years of battle with a reputation as the most formidable figure in Roman politics and warfare. He had defeated every significant rival, save for a few holdouts like Labienus and Pompey's sons. This return was not just a homecoming. It was a pivotal moment that shifted the trajectory of Roman governance from an era of political instability to one dominated by Caesar's supreme authority. This arrival would become one of the defining events in Roman history, setting in motion a chain of reforms, power plays, and monumental public spectacles. The Senate's calculated gamble, extending Caesar's power. Before Caesar even stepped into the city, the Senate was already moving to secure their position in a rapidly changing political landscape. They preemptively extended Caesar's dictatorship for an unprecedented 10 years, a stark departure from the traditional 6-month term reserved for emergencies. Why would they do this? The Senate calculated that by offering Caesar power willingly, they could maintain a semblance of control and prevent him from simply seizing it by force. The attached timeline was intended as a safety valve, allowing them to revisit the arrangement when they hoped Caesar might be weaker or more willing to retire. It was a high-stakes move that underscored their awareness of Caesar's unmatched power. Unparalleled authority. Caesar's expansive new powers. With the extension of his dictatorship came an array of other powers that solidified Caesar's grip on Rome. He was granted the right to serve as consul for 5 consecutive years, a title that allowed him to steer Rome's legislative process. This unprecedented accumulation of power meant that Caesar had a free hand in implementing laws, military campaigns, and political strategies without significant opposition. Moreover, he was also given the power to declare war and issue pardons independently, powers that placed him in a quasi-monarchical position. While the Senate still retained some legislative authority, it was clear that Caesar had become more than just a leader. He was now the architect of Rome's future. 4 triumphs, questionable justifications. Upon his return, Caesar petitioned the Senate for the right to celebrate 4 separate triumphs, each symbolizing a significant military campaign. The first triumph was for his conquest of Gaul, a campaign that expanded Rome's borders significantly and solidified his military legacy. However, the legitimacy of the other 3 triumphs was highly debatable. In Egypt, Caesar's campaign was complicated. He suffered initial defeats and later victories, ultimately leaving the province under Cleopatra's control rather than claiming it outright. The triumph for Asia Minor celebrated his brief campaign ending with the Battle of Zela, which merely restored the status quo rather than adding new territories. The most contentious was his North African triumph, where Caesar fought fellow Romans rather than foreign enemies. To justify it, he pointed fingers at King Juba of Numidia as the mastermind behind the campaign. Despite these thin justifications, the Senate, perhaps too fatigued or politically savvy to oppose him, approved all 4. The spectacle of Caesar's triumphs. Caesar's triumphs were nothing short of a spectacle that stunned Rome. The Gallic triumph was the most celebrated, featuring wagons laden with paintings depicting his victories, mountains of plundered treasure, and a parade of prisoners, including the famous Gallic leader Vercingetorix. This fierce opponent had been kept alive for 6 years, solely to be paraded in defeat before his execution. The procession took place along the Via Sacra, the sacred path lined with Rome's most important temples. When Caesar's chariot wheel snapped near the Temple of Fortuna, it was seen as an ominous sign that luck had turned against him. He recovered quickly, switched to a new chariot, and continued, finishing the ceremony with an act of humility by ascending the steps of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on his knees. The conclusion of the Gallic triumph was both somber and brutal. Vercingetorix was ceremoniously strangled, and the remaining prisoners met the same fate. The following days were marked by the Egyptian triumph, which featured Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe. Taken captive, she was young, attractive, and won the sympathy of the crowd. The public's appeal for mercy pressured Caesar into sparing her, much to Cleopatra's discontent. This decision, however, was politically shrewd. Having an Egyptian royal in his pocket bolstered Rome's leverage over Egypt. Generosity or political strategy. Caesar's lavish gifts. To ensure his soldiers' unwavering loyalty and win public favor, Caesar embarked on an unprecedented spree of generosity. Each legionary received a silver talent, an amount that translated to more than a decade's worth of pay. Centurions were awarded 2 talents, and officers and command staff received 4. The scale of this distribution was mind-boggling, underlining Caesar's personal wealth, now comparable to that of a small nation. His largesse didn't stop at the military. In a move that shocked the aristocracy, Caesar gifted each Roman citizen an amount equivalent to 4 months of wages. While critics saw this as shameless pandering, the public embraced it, and since it was funded from Caesar's private reserves, the Senate couldn't intervene. Land for veterans. Caesar's complex solution. With over 22,000 soldiers eligible for retirement, Caesar faced the dual challenge of fulfilling his promises of land and cash bonuses. His solution was to offer Rome's farmers the opportunity to sell their land to the state at inflated prices, creating a voluntary pool for redistribution. This plan was a lifeline for struggling farmers and ensured Caesar's veterans received their due. However, with the vast numbers involved, full redistribution would take years, illustrating that even Caesar's near-limitless power had logistical constraints. Rebuilding the Senate, a radical expansion. The aftermath of the Civil War left the Senate in shambles. To fill the gaps and ensure governance, Caesar used his dictatorship to appoint hundreds of new senators. These appointees included retired centurions, rural aristocrats who supported his campaigns, and Gallic nobles who had aided him during the Gallic Wars. Although these Gauls were Romanized in language and customs, their inclusion sparked an uproar among the Roman elite. The streets buzzed with paranoid jokes about senators in Gallic attire and strange customs infiltrating the hallowed Senate halls. Despite the criticism, Caesar's move was strategic. The Senate's numbers swelled, effectively stacking it with loyalists who would support his vision and legislation. The changes meant that while the Senate's size would eventually normalize, its composition ensured Caesar's influence for a generation. Comprehensive reforms and anti-corruption measures. Caesar's reforms were not limited to Senate appointments. Recognizing the need for effective governance of Rome's provinces, he increased the number of annually elected praetors from 8 to 10, widening the path for future leaders. To combat corruption, he passed laws that mandated automatic expulsion from the Senate for any governor found guilty of corruption. This was not just a symbolic gesture. It was a fundamental step in preventing the exploitation of Rome's subjects and reducing local unrest. These anti-corruption measures, while unpopular among Rome's elite, showed Caesar's commitment to systemic reform and stability. Caesar's calendar reform, a lasting legacy. One of Caesar's most enduring legacies was his overhaul of the Roman calendar. The old lunar system had become increasingly chaotic, falling 3 months out of sync with the solar year due to years of neglect. Caesar, who had observed the more precise Egyptian solar calendar during his time in Egypt, enlisted Sosigenes of Alexandria, an expert astronomer, to assist him in creating a new system. The result was the Julian calendar, a 365-day year, with a leap day added every 4 years. This reform corrected the drift, aligning the calendar with the solar year and removing politicians' ability to manipulate dates. To reset the drift, Caesar declared that the year 46 BCE would include an additional 90 days, making it 445 days long, the longest year in recorded history. The new system began on January 1st, 45 BCE, and with slight modifications, it remains in use to this day. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed this dive into Caesar's wild return to Rome and his game-changing reforms, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating stories from histories. Drop a comment on what you found most surprising. There's always more to explore.